It's September, and that means that school's back in session. But what does this mean for a Christian student who's heading off to college for the first time? Most young believers won't have the opportunity to enroll in a Christian college. They'll attend a secular university or a state school. Now, with the past emphasis on critical theory and DEI, as well as an active disdain for biblical values, is it possible that a Christian student can not only survive, but thrive during his or her college years? Well, hi all, I'm Lenny Esposito, and on this episode we'll be speaking with Dr. Owen Anderson, a Christian professor who teaches at Arizona State University, on the difficulties Christians face on campus, and how the push for DEI really hasn't gone away, but has morphed in recent days. Also, we want to talk about just what students can do to make their college years the best they can be. It's time to be aware and be prepared for college life, coming up on this. Come let us reason together. Well, good day again, everyone. I'm Lenny Esposito, and I'm excited to have you here on our podcast today. As I had mentioned in the beginning, we are going to look at colleges and what students coming into college are facing, what we can expect, what struggles maybe do the students have, what struggles do the colleges have and the teachers in dealing with the preconceptions of the students, and how things are still actually pretty difficult for people of faith who are coming to secular campuses, which really is the majority of students who are believers these days. Now, with me, I am lucky to have my friend and college professor, Dr. Owen Anderson. Dr. Owen Anderson has been teaching philosophy and religious studies for some 25 years. He's currently a professor of philosophy and religious studies at Arizona State University, so he teaches at a secular school. His research focuses on general revelation and related questions about reality, value, and knowledge. Now, he's been a fellow at Princeton University, a visiting scholar at Princeton Seminary, and a fellow at the University of Colorado Boulder, published 7 books. What you may not know, though, is Owen has also been a leader in much of the push against the DEI movement and the woke movement on his campus at Arizona State University. And it's gotten him into a little bit of hot water from time to time as well. So first of all, Owen, welcome to the program. Glad to have you with me.
Yeah, I'm always glad to talk with you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and we can geek out about philosophy stuff if we really wanted to. But this is a little more broad. And first of all, why don't you give us a little bit of background, because you have been pretty upfront and forward in your resistance to some of the mandates that had been happening, really reached their zenith in maybe 2022, 2023 with the DEI movement on campus and things like that. Can you give us kind of a 30,000-foot overview of how that came to be and what brought you into this fight, so to speak?
Yeah, well, I've always been in my whole career as a student and professor has been in the secular university, secular, professional conferences, etc. So I've always had an insider's look at what's going on. And you and I remember back when multiculturalism was the drumbeat of the day. And so that just taught that we have to study all cultures because they're all equal. No cultures are better than others. And of course, that's not true. Well, we should study all cultures, but they're not all equal. Some of them are built on falsehoods. And that's also important to teach students how to recognize those falsehoods. But a shift occurred. And I think it's probably around perhaps 2008. I think maybe professors began to feel emboldened by Obama's election that they had finally reached the golden age and they can just insert their ideology into the classrooms with no fear of pushback from anyone. But I saw it really hit hard once Trump was elected. It just kind of pushed them to a point where they were using faculty time to say whatever they want politically. Because our faculty time, we're state employees. We're supposed to use it for enrollment questions, schedule questions, events. We're not supposed to use it to push our own political agenda. But they felt pretty safe that everyone in the room was on the radical side with them. And they're probably right, except for me. And so I saw this going on. And then what really made me speak up is when went from just kind of complaining in faculty meetings to forcing this on the rest of us in our curriculum. So they started a project in my school of decolonizing the curriculum. And that's when I spoke up and said, I'm not going to do that.
And that's the label they gave it, was decolonizing the curriculum.
And it's important for people on the outside to know decolonize, because someone might say, well, aren't we all opposed to colonization? I mean, we don't really do that anymore. We wouldn't want to be colonized. But decolonizing philosophy is a Marxist philosophy out of South America. And so it's an anti-Christian. It views Christianity as the problem in the modern world. And so I was pushing back against that to say, yeah, of course I'm not going to, I'll teach you about that. I'm not going to teach that it's true, though. And so I began to speak up, and about that same time, ASU put out a required employee training. And this training was about DEI, and it's presented to the public as being about inclusion and everyone getting along. But as I got into the material, it was really about decolonizing, anti-whiteness, anti-Christianity, anti-biblical marriage. And so because of that, I ended up taking ASU to court. I'm represented by the Goldwater Institute, which is a very large conservative think tank that tends to represent cases against government overreach. So our case is that ASU is violating the law in Arizona, which prohibits racial racism. Basically, this racism against you if you're European or white. So we're still going through that court case. We won the first level, and they appealed it. So now we're at the appellate court in Arizona. The interesting thing is they took down the training quietly. And so that tells me what's going on here is about saving face. They don't want to say, hey, you're right, we made a little mistake there. We're going to rethink our employee training. They want that to go away.
The lawyers may have said this leaves you open for liability. Yeah.
Yeah, but they don't want to admit that. They don't say anything about it publicly. And so they still want to try to win this case. So, I mean, imagine this. They're paying lawyers. They hired a law firm named Perkins Coie, which is a massive nationwide liberal law firm. They've had run-ins already with the Trump administration. Trump took away their security clearance. I mean, this is a big deal to hire Perkins Coie. And they're hiring them, paying them to defend employee training that they don't even offer anymore.
Wow. Now, Dan Grossenbach also made headlines. He was at University of Arizona, correct? He's not at your school.
No, but U of A down in Tucson. Difference is he got fired.
Right. He got fired for standing up for a similar objection to this ideology. Yep. So this is interesting. So really 2015, now 2015 seemed to be like a perfect storm. I think you're right. I think in terms of political motivation, people were, especially those on the far left, were very scared that Trump was coming in and Obama was leaving. Of course, Obama promised a panacea of kind of a left-wing ideology that would permeate society, and it, like most left-wing ideology promises, it failed to materialize. At the same time, you have the rise of the BLM movement, right? You have BLM becomes big, and then Me Too. And so public press and public sentiment seems to be on that side of the coin. And I think that's, when you have all these things together, people start to say, at least the activists start to say aloud what they have always believed kind of internally. And you being in the humanities, of course, you're going to get it more vigorously than, say, the hard sciences and mathematics or things of that nature.
Right. Well, that's really where the big problem is. However, I have a Substack, which is Dr. Owen Anderson. And what I do on my Substack is mostly dedicated to looking at stuff at ASU to give parents a window into what's going on. But therefore, it's going to be good for any parent. You're sending your kid to UCLA, to NYU. It's going to be the same kind of stuff. But I document it with material from ASU, and unfortunately, it doesn't stay in the humanities. At ASU, I've shown how our web pages for STEM STEM degrees, the first thing they talk about is DEI-related material. So that's true for STEM. If you go on, we have a particular degree for space exploration, and DEI is front and center. And I wonder to myself, like, Is that what Elon cares about as he puts together this trip to Mars? Is he worried about that?
Well, yeah, and does the calculations add up? That's a really important point too, because when you're shooting someone to another planet, you better make sure that you hit your target. That becomes kind of a crucial piece. I know that a couple of medical schools have run into this issue, and they've been running afoul because they're finding out that they're issuing medical degrees not to the most skilled individuals,
Yeah.
but they're allowing students to come in to fill quotas. And it's that old joke. What do you call a guy who graduates dead last out of a group of 500 from medical school? Doctor. You call him doctor. And do you want to see that guy? Is that the guy who you want to be treated by? So that's a part of it. So and I think a lot of people have, again, broadly kind of understood or at least watched some of this. The counter against these types of movements really started to show up post-COVID, and people started pushing back. You had James Lindsay writing critical theories. You had Christopher Rufo starting to target different institutions, corporations, schools, showing how this is permeated, kind of really banging a drum. Of course, Ron DeSantis in his campaign in 2024 for president underscored some of this as well. And then Trump won and started passing laws. Florida, for the full state, revoked some of these DEI pieces. So we're all good now, right? We don't have to worry about that anymore. Is that the way it goes?
Yeah. Well, it certainly is the way the news might make a parent feel, which is why I continue to report about what's going on. Because what you'll see is that the same ideas are there. No professor was converted because Trump won. And so the same ideas are there, but they're going to be given new names. Like, for example, DEI switches to design justice. And so I have a Substack about what is that? Well, you'll read it. It's just more of the same thing. And so I think parents need to realize this isn't going away. We don't get to a point where 97% of faculty identify as left or far left without discrimination in hiring. How did that happen? If we look at any other field, and if you told a humanities professor at a state university, there's a field where 97% of the working group is white men, they'd say, what? Well, that must be discrimination. That's structural racism. But then you point out, hey, actually, I got it wrong. It's your job, and it's radical liberals. Oh, well, that's because we self-select for intelligent people. Okay, well, I might disagree about that in one sense, but what you're telling me is you think you're a meritocracy and you believe meritocracies matter, even if you end up with skewed numbers. Yeah, yes, I guess in our case we do believe that. So it's filled with this rank hypocrisy. And the question I ask parents and students is, why would you want to learn from someone who is a public hypocrite? Not that I'm calling them a name, but that this is demonstrably the case from their public statements. What could they possibly teach you about wisdom or the good life?
Right. So let's take a step back. For example, you first mentioned multiculturalism. And this has been kind of an old saw. But we don't, if you think about it for more than, say, a minute, you can clearly see why every culture is equal just falls on its face. For example, there are many more North African nations who have a cultural practice, and they laud this cultural practice of what amounts to female genital mutilation. Now, do we want to support that? Is that just as equal as anything else? I mean, everyone on college campuses has come out against such barbaric practices.
But it's not true anymore.
Not true anymore, sure.
Hey, that's what they do. That's their culture.
Yeah, and so it puts the person on the left in a big conundrum because they want to say women are sexual beings and they should have the right to express their sexuality, unless, of course, they're from this culture, and then we have to forcibly take it from them. So this is why I'm saying is if you think about it for more than 60 seconds, it starts to come to pass.
Well, and also the some recent comments about discovering a baby human sacrifice altar among the Mayans. And the archaeologist who discovered this, I'm reading this interview, said, well, it wasn't a violent thing. It was just part of their culture. And this is an incoherent sentence to come out of the person's mouth, but the person's thinking to themselves they have to defend multiculturalism because they don't want someone saying the Mayans weren't a great culture, but we all know they weren't.
Right.
We all know the Aztecs weren't. Like no one's clamoring to live in those places.
80,000 living sacrifices in a 100-year span is what they calculate for the Aztecs.
They did some remarkable feats of engineering. There's no doubt about it. Astronomy. But that's not enough to make someone say, I'd like to live there, because you're probably going to be one of the ones who sacrifice. You're not going to be Montezuma.
Right, yeah, you're going to be on the cutting table getting your live heart ripped out of you. Exactly. And this is the problem. One of the interesting points in this is when you really push, when you really say, let's get real, the situation changes. I've always used the example of the anthropologist who embeds himself with an Amazonian native tribe, and they will talk about things such as if a child is born and either gets sick or maybe carrying disease, they'll call the local witch doctor out. They'll call the local shaman out to try and save the child. But if the child can't be saved, they'll abandon the child. And they say, we may think this is cruel in the West, but really they have to do it for self-preservation because they can't afford the rest of the tribe to get sick. And it's just a different, it's not wrong, it's just a different way of expressing themselves. However, if that very same anthropologist comes down and contracts, say, yellow fever, he's not going to go to that local shaman. He's going to immediately go to the best Western hospital he can find, right? He's going to try and find the best antibiotics, the best doctor treatments. Why? Because he doesn't believe what he's actually saying. He doesn't believe that they're equal. He wants to live. And so in the real world, these things kind of, I think, blow up. And that's what I found.
That's what I mean by just public demonstrable hypocrisy, right? That's what it is. And so the question is, we send our kids somewhere. You noted in your introduction that most Christian kids, if they go to university, it's going to be a state college or university. And we can debate about that, if we should even have such things. That's a great debate to have. However, we do have such things. They're currently supported by tax money, and their goal is to make a university education affordable for the citizens of that state. One of the things I point out about ASU is that this semester on their main website, their welcome website, the first main story is welcome to our international students. You got to go way down the list before you have them comment about Arizona students. And so ASU, Arizona State University, is not built to help serve the nations of the world. It's built for Arizona students. But they've forgotten that mission. And it's part of the outcome of this multiculturalism, because they would say, probably the humanities professor who's in DEI would say something like, well, national borders are due to the projection of unjust power structures, and so they're artificial and nations aren't real. Some version of that.
Yeah, we have the same problem in California, and it's been actually highlighted that why, and they've actually had to roll back some of their overseas recruitment, but overseas students pay full tuition, and so it's a money. That's
a big thing. That's the budget.
Well. Yeah, it's the budget. So that's what happens with that. So a couple
think about, just real quick, because people might say, well, yeah, that's true. Don't let that make you feel any sympathy. These universities unwisely expanded at a rate in which was not sustainable, and then to sustain it, they're saying we have to bring in international students. Well, maybe you have to live with paring back because of unwise development in the first place.
Right, and we can. There's a whole show on the problems associated with trying to get students to college, forcing the idea that all students need a college education, how FAFSA and these types of low interest loan programs actually created a glut of money. And so what universities did was they tried to attract students in any way, shape, or form at all. And it did two things. First of all, it vastly increased the administrative base, not the number of teachers, but the number of administrators. How can I get that money to my school as opposed to someone else's school. And then secondly, they started trying to attract students by making the schools more fun, more attractive, more, rock wall climbing, bigger gyms. And so they put a lot of money into a lot of these building programs and things like, as you're saying, and they ran a little too fast. And one of the reasons why tuitions continue to rise is because the money is out there, right? And all you need to do is get a bigger grant, bigger loan. And then students are graduating with a 4-year degree in a nominal subject where they have a $60,000 or $80,000 loan payment now that they're going to have to make. It's a whole, just the economics behind it is easy to understand, but that's a
there's a character
subset.
I call the good old fashioned 70s liberal. He would have spoken up about this. The 70s liberal professor who hates banks and big corporations and industrial complexes. This is just the university industrial complex. And in the 70s, every professor would have spoken up about this. But they're gone. Where are those professors now? Well, they're all being paid and having very nice tenured lives by the university industrial complex.
Yes, exactly. And so let me push back on this a little bit, because I know that there are folks who have said in the past, "Oh, you people are making too much out of this. This DEI." First of all, they'll try to hang you on a semantic argument. They'll say, DEI, that's a legal precedent. That's a legal proposition. You're not learning about
theory,
that in physics class. You're not learning about that in literature class. So how can you claim that? But there was a thing, and especially in the 90s, called critical pedagogy, as opposed to simply critical theory, right? So while critical theory did start as a legal argument,
when it comes out of South American decolonizing, Paulo Freire,
but then it was expressed by I'm forgetting her name now, Crenshaw.
UCLA,
and then you had unpacking the invisible knapsack and all of these things. But then there was a change that said, well, wait, how do we teach this? And so sometimes when people say, well, you can't be against critical theory, that's a legal structure, I say, well, I'm against critical pedagogy, because that is a real thing as well. It's teaching how to teach this stuff across domains, right? And this is part of really what we're looking at today.
Well, we're looking at that, and also whether it's critical theory or critical pedagogy, DEI, it's all a family of things. It falls under the Marxist dialectic. And so let me explain what that is, because Marxism I'm not using that as an insult. I'm using it as a name of a philosophy. So I've had professors say, come on, you guys just throw around Marxism. It's actually the left does that with fascism. The left will throw around fascism to people who aren't fascists at all. They just don't like them. But Marxism is a specific philosophy, and even with the professors, most of them will say, yeah, you're right. I am. I'm this kind. There's 20 kinds of Marxists. I'm this kind. Every now and then someone will say, no, I'm not a Marxist. But then I'll ask about their beliefs, and it just turns out to be Marxism. And so there's two key pieces to Marxism. One is that your environment determines what you do in life, especially your moral character. And then second, history is guided by a materialist dialectic of conflict between classes, races, genders, religions. And so those two things together give you Marxism, and they give you all of if you thought of Marxism as the big bubble with lots of tentacles coming down, gives you all of those different schools that come down out of it. So critical pedagogy is just one of those, which says your student is shaped by his or her environment, and you got to change that environment and you'll make better people.
Right. Exactly. And so that's one of the goals. And again, one of the reasons why you see so much in higher education is this is what they've learned, and this is therefore what they parrot.
Well, and think about you and I as Christians. In a Christian age, what we would have seen was persons going into the pastorate, into evangelism, into missions, into Christian publishing. But now you have an age, 40 plus years of intellectuals who hate Christianity. Well, they don't have churches to go preach at. They don't have mission fields per se. They can go into publishing, But the main place it draws them is a university professor job. That's where they end up, they use their evangelical zeal for Marxism by going into that job. So in that way, it is self-selecting, but we've let it happen.
Right, right. And now there has been a little bit of a resurgence, though. Bill Craig, of course, has talked about this, how especially in analytic philosophy, you're starting to see a significant number of evangelical Christians making real contributions to the field and being put in specific positions at high prestige universities, things of that nature. So that's good to see, but it's, philosophy isn't the class that most kids want to take. Unfortunately, the university used to have as its main goal the idea of creating fully developed humans who are well-rounded in understanding the human condition, who can critically analyze their situation in their life and weigh different aspects or different ideas. And I think that's has eroded. I don't think that as the university became more a training ground for job placement and less a training ground for the human mind, it's also become more just rote in ideas of digest and repeat.
Yeah.
And we see that a lot, especially in undergrad situations. I think that's a lot of students have that. When you're teaching, do you see that that's a struggle that you have with your students to get them to break out of the, well, is it going to be on the test and do I need to know it?
Well, yeah. I don't know the number. I would guess like 95% of them, that's just what they're doing. This is just given to them by their guidance counselor. You need some classes. This class fits your schedule. You'll take these 4 classes this semester, and not out of interest. And I remember coming out of high school, going into college, it kind of blew my mind to think, wow, I could pick any of these topics. This is amazing. Like, I don't even have enough classes in the day to pick all the ones I'm interested in. I didn't need a guidance counselor except for to tell me, well, you need some science, some math, some humanities. Otherwise, it was so interesting to me compared to high school, where it is more just, here you go. But we've kind of brought that high school thing into college now, where students just say, hey, I guess I got to get a 4-year degree, and I want to have some fun. It looks like this is a fun place for 4 years to continue being a kid. For 4 more years, I'll delay adolescent. I'll live in arrested development. Hey, there was a show of that name. And get what degree, right? So yeah, you already have this problem that they've bought into this myth. And then they're told, here, you're going to take this class. And like you said, philosophy, what on earth is that? Why does it matter? What's on the test?
Okay, and so let's take this from the perspective of, say, an 18-year-old and their parents who are listening in, who is going to go to start his freshman year at a state school. I actually have a cousin who is my cousin's daughter starting as an 18-year-old in Boise State. Scholarship, and a lot of these are placed because of either sports scholarships, things like that as well. But they're Christians. They were reared Christian, but they don't necessarily have the equipment, the intellectual background, nor do they have the experience to understand how subtle some of these things are. So first of all, they come in, and the first thing that we notice is that a lot of the talk on campus, not simply by the teachers, but you get the student rush days, and you get the club days, and the sorority and fraternity, where everybody's tabling, and everybody wants you to join their group, and you start to see a lot of things that you would necessarily support. You wouldn't necessarily be for these things, but they are getting a lot of coverage, and you start to hear people talk, and you almost feel like, if I say anything, I'm going to be on the outs. So The Hill did a recent article called "Performative Virtue Signaling Has Become a Threat to Higher Education."
Yeah.
And they talk about a study. This is a great study that was conducted between 2023 2025. Interviewed 1,452 students at Northwestern University as well as the University of Michigan. Now, they weren't studying politics. They wanted to ask what happens. This was the question that their study was seeking to solve. What happens to identity formation when belief is replaced by adherence to orthodoxy? And when one of the questions they asked students was, have you ever pretended to hold more progressive views than you truly endorse to succeed socially or academically?
Oh, yeah.
In other words, have you pretended to be more progressive than you are? 88% said yes.
Yeah, they're taught to lie.
88%. And publicly they conform, privately they question, but in isolation. They said their beliefs were 78% of them told they self-censor on gender identity, 72% on politics, 68% on family values, and more than 80% said they had submitted classwork that misrepresented their views in order to align with the professors. Now that's huge. And what we're doing is, the threat is twofold. The first is not teaching students to think critically, but again, just go along.
Yeah.
And then the second threat is it gives a false assumption of conformity that many of the administrators and many of the politicians who examine the polls in higher education, things like that, they all assume that people are truly more for these things than they are.
Yeah.
And that's a huge concern to me.
Through a negative feedback loop.
Exactly. So what do you see at your school specifically? Do these numbers sound correct to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would 100% think so. And I mean, students are always going to say, my teacher made me believe whatever was on the test. I mean, yeah, by definition, but you can ask questions, especially in the humanities class, that don't require the student to commit to believing what a specific philosophy teaches. And so that's not what happens, though. In these classes, you're taught that unless you agree with LGBTQ, you're a bigot. Now, no 18-year-old wants to be called a bigot by their peers, and so
Right.
they go along with this. Now, at ASU, we had an event last fall sponsored by the ASU Humanities Institute about the benefits of polyamory. You don't see anything like that, the benefits of biblical marriage. It's completely one-sided. So the argument that, well, Lenny, you're talking about going around, you see lots of tables. Sure, it's a state school. You got to let everyone set up tables. Okay, but that's not what happens. When a university sponsors an event, it's always on this side of it. The closest to conservative might be you'll have a class or a presentation about the Constitution, civics. But you'll never get over to the other side of why is biblical marriage far superior to what they're teaching over here in the John Money LGBTQ side.
Yeah, exactly. I had, when I was at UCR, they would do what they would call Wednesday nooners, and where every Wednesday they would have either some club or other would sponsor somebody to come out, because usually there's lunch on the lawn. Usually there would be maybe a concert afterwards at 1 o'clock, but sometimes they would sponsor people. And every once in a while the Christian group would bring out a preacher or something like that, and of course he got pummeled. We did, I was part of a group who would do things like, what we would do is we would set up tables out there, and we'd put a microphone in front of our table, microphone in the middle of the open arena, and we would normally tell the atheist group, hey, we're going to be there, we're going to be just answering questions. That's all we want to do is answer questions. And of course the atheist group wants to engage, right? So they're coming in. And we would have these, what we would call forums. And so they would usually ask something or challenge something, and we'd go back and forth, but we'd have a nice rational discussion about it. And the goal was not necessarily to convert the person behind the microphone, because most of the people who have the temerity to step up to the microphone are pretty set in their ways.
Oh, yeah.
But the goal was to get a whole bunch of students around the organization just listening. And then we had other kids from the Christian clubs peppered in who would say, what do you think of that? How do you? And there were a lot of students who said, I never heard my faith be defended like that before. I've never heard that we had real answers to some of these objections. And that was a very interesting expert. Yeah. So it was to at least say, hey, there are. It sounds silly. It sounds it sounds terrible until you understand there's another answer out there, and then all of a sudden you can respond appropriately. So there are ways to do that. So so again, I'm the 18-year-old. I know that I have to conform. I have to kind of keep my ideas to myself until I find that one or two friends who may share. And even then, I don't know. You're taking a step. But what do I do if a professor assigns a work that I don't agree with? I had one student come to me who was assigned the text for Inherit the Wind. Actually, not. I mean, the book was taken from the film, and the film, of course, has nothing to do with the actual historic aspects of the. It's very, very loosely based on the events of the Scopes trial, and you have to write a report on this. And she was very concerned because do I write a positive report about Inherit the Wind when I don't believe in evolution? So how do you counsel students who are in that kind of a situation?
Yeah, I think the first is on the front end. So this summer I did a Substack post, How to Avoid Filth, looking into college classes. And so the front end is you got to do your research so you don't end up in that situation. You can there's at a big university, UCR, ASU, we're large. You can have lots of classes that fill that same slot in your schedule and help you graduate. So you can usually look a professor up. You can see what they're assigning, the kinds of things they teach, and protect yourself from ever getting in that situation. And then on the other side, what should happen is professors in humanities should be at a state school should be teaching you about multiple views and then how to learn skills of thinking and adjudicating those views. And so I would approach the topic that way. The question about, is this book biased? Yeah. My professor loves it. Okay. So just present it as, what was the argument on one side for creation? What was the argument on the other side? And then really it's about, what are the limits of state education? So I would just encourage the student as best they can, whatever the subject is, to still present it as assessing arguments. That usually, in my experience, that's been sufficient, even with very radical professors, because professors still know there's an appeal process. If you get a D on a paper because of your view, you can also appeal it. So that's the back end. So front end, avoid missionary professors. Middle, keep your papers objective and well written. Back end, if you get judged for that, take it to the next level, the dean or whoever it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. I think doing good work, if you are properly citing your sources, if you're properly holding to this ideology, parsing the argument well. And the whole point of the Scopes trial was to say that evolution should be taught alongside creationism, not in supplement, not to supplicate creationism. It wasn't supposed to replace it. So it was, and you can say, well, then the outcome of the Scopes trial should be that intelligent design should be taught alongside evolution now. So you can make that kind of an argument, but it can be a little bit daunting. Again, as someone who's throughout high school, you've never had to do that. Teachers were always not simply the authority, but they were also the adults, and you were still considered a minor. So that learning curve is, I think, part of it as well. Another thing I think that can be helpful to your point of looking up and doing your research ahead of time is look for the Christian clubs on campus and find out who the faculty advisor is to those Christian clubs, because you may want to have a person in your corner who understands the nuance of your school and can give you some warning, give you some insight. So I would definitely recommend that as a Christian student. Find out who are the Christian professors on your campus, and usually you do that by starting with wherever the Christian clubs are and who the faculty advisors are for that, because that will give you at least a safe haven, so to speak. And when it's really difficult. Some of these are not black and white. Some of these are very gray, and students will come to profs and say, how can I manage this? So I think that can be a really helpful aspect as well.
Yeah, and just getting out of the mentality where you do kind of trust your high school professors, and you don't really think about it. Most of the times you just get this, and your only question is this a hard or an easy class, a hard or an easy professor, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into an ideological war, and your professors might be aiming for your soul. I mean, I've been around professors who really enjoy destroying the faith of Christians. It's like they get to talk about that at the faculty meetings, how great it is. And so I think the students and parents need to realize you're stepping into the middle of a very heated battle, and in many cases, literally for your child's soul.
In all of this, how much does maybe what would people would consider a tangential aspect of modern schooling play a part? And I mean things like technology, because students today are relying more and more on technology in order not only to engage with one another socially. And again, one of the problems we have with schools is that the face that we put on our social media is not reality. It's a pseudo face.
Yeah.
And so people don't understand each other. I think this is part of the problem that increases the amount of depression that we're seeing, and loneliness and isolation. Funny, social media makes us less social because everybody, it's by its nature. But secondly, you now have, of course, the rising of AI and the reliance of AI in order to kind of do your thinking for you. So there are technological concerns I have that if AI is doing our thinking for us, then we're not learning how to distinguish and discern ourselves, and it makes it even harder, doesn't it?
Yep.
In order to sort these ideas through. I believe that it's like a muscle, right? Willpower is like a muscle. You have to exercise it. You have to get better at it. This is one of the reasons why the Christian spiritual discipline of, say, fasting is important, because it helps you exercise the muscle of willpower and you get better at resisting something. But secondly, thinking well is a muscle, and we're starting to lose that. And I'm hearing from college professors when they're giving kids the assignments to write papers that some of these kids are like, I haven't done this from scratch in 4 or 5 years. I've forgotten
Or ever.
how.
Yeah.
Or ever. So how's technology affecting students, and how is it leaving them open to some of these other problems?
Yeah, I mean, there's already what it's doing is it just brings out what's on the inside already. If you want to learn things, you want to say, how do I communicate well in spoken word and written word, then that won't really, AI will just be like a spell checking thing for you. Just like we've had spell check for 30 plus years. So, but on the other hand, if it's just the attitude is, I just want to get done. I just want to get back to the rock wall climbing thing that Lenny mentioned earlier, and have some fun with my friends, then education is an impediment to my enjoying myself, and I'll take whatever tool I can get to make it go away. And so I think all that's happening is the hearts of many are being exposed, and then we have to deal with that as a society. What do we do about that? People don't care to learn these things. They're not curious anymore. They're self-centered. They're self-focused on pleasure. Now, I'm not being dystopian. I think that's been pretty standard for a long time. If you look back, 100 years ago, you'll find people saying, "What do we do about the youth? They're so self-centered." But part of the job of the older people is to help the youth get out of that. And if we're instead just offering them lots of even more ways, and then on top of that, teaching them to blame other people for whatever problem you have in life, and essentially these DEI classes are teaching you to hate your neighbor as yourself. Like, I hate that neighbor because they're the ones that made my life hard, and not learning to love your neighbor, which also is an act of the will. It takes difficulty because your neighbor's not lovable, but the truth is neither are you. And so all of that's taken away from our students. They're made victims. They're taught to be complainers, to covet, to envy, and then you throw AI in there.
So, well, you bring up a great point, because this happens quite a bit, and I engage with folks in this age group quite a lot, and they a couple of things I notice frequently. One is that when things get difficult, they like to there's uncomfortable with the idea of difficulty in life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing this, first of all, I'm dealing with a whole lot of antinatalists and antinatalism and all of that, where they're saying it's better not to bring children into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And they argue that it's actually kind to not exist. And I'm saying, okay, were you born 15 minutes ago, or do you not realize that this is the absolute best time in the history of humanity to live?
Yeah.
It's like you said, you don't want to be an Aztec or one of the people that the Aztecs conquered. Yeah.
Bob's the one who said, "Be fruitful, multiply." So it's just another example of
That's
rebellion
right.
against God. To say he doesn't know what he's talking about. He hasn't looked at the world lately. It's so bad, I know better than God does.
But secondly, one of the things that I'm starting to understand is this idea, and one of the arguments that I have put forth is, look, people are an inherent good. Babies are a blessing, right? So sometimes you do things just because you do something, and one of the persons argued back to me, well, that's because you get these good feelings that your legacy will continue, that the baby gives you good feelings. Well, just because something gives you good feelings doesn't make it wrong. I can get good feelings by serving at the homeless shelter, by going and reading to the folks in the retirement community. And the reason why I get good feelings for that is because there's inherent worth in the act itself.
Well, it's funny, they're dismissing having a legacy. Like, oh, you only have good feelings because you'll have a legacy. Yes, and that's a good thing to have. You don't want to be a dead end.
Right. But this is my point, is nobody is thinking, we've become so hyper individualized that nobody thinks about community. They only think about the impact on themselves. And by hoisting their criticism as something to the individual, as opposed to, does it benefit the community? Is there such a thing as human flourishing? You had mentioned how we're starting to fall away from all of the transcendentals, the goodness, the truth, the beauty, because really all of this DEI stuff is a reverse of what people over the course of millennia have found to be the best way for humanity to become better. And I worry that, and I don't know quite how to start building community again. It should happen in the church primarily. And even churches don't do it very well. But I think this is, again, social media separates us, it bifurcates us. College should be a time to develop community. And are we doing that on college campuses? And it should be community in more ways than just, your Saturday night fraternity party.
Yeah.
So how do you see the students today? Are they bonding with one another? Do you get engagement in classes? Do they start talking with one another, wrestling with these ideas in your classes?
Well, it's a great point you bring up. And real quick, I want to mention something. You said about this person and having children that they were arguing not existing is good. And I think that's one way to frame all non-Christian worldviews. To exist is bad. It requires you obey the rules of being that God established. And to not exist is good. And so what do you do in Eastern meditation? You silence all thought of yourself and you stop existing, either by going into non-existence for Buddhism or losing your identity and becoming part of the one in Hinduism. And so I think that's a really good example of, that's precisely what the non-Christian worldview will teach. Because once you start existing, you quickly realize God also exists, and you're not God. And so non-existence is the absolute rebellion against God. I'm not even going to exist anymore. I refuse to obey by God's rules. But what you'll see on university campuses is DEI has another letter, B, DEI-B, which is for belonging. And so the universities will say some of the same things you just said. Radical individualism is the problem. People are isolated by social media. They get mental health issues. They need belonging. But it's not so much the question of if they need that. I think everyone recognizes that. It's what is the belonging. And so when you throw them into belonging means your sexual urges for whatever you want, with a couple tiny restrictions, are good for you, and we're going to encourage each other to live those out. Well, now that's unhealthy. That's not good at all. That's not belonging. That's encouraging bad and immoral behavior. And so the real issue is, what is the university's solution in what it calls belonging? Is it hatred of your neighbor? hatred of the United States because it's structurally racist and it forced you to have a bad life. While you're at a university, living in the dorm, going to the rec center, you have a horrible life because of structural racism.
You guys with your high-speed internet connections and your $400,000 laptops, yeah, you're just living a terrible life, yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're right. What we want is healthy belonging. And that requires that we recognize a couple things. One is that, yes, we are made in the image of God, so each of us is valuable, but we're also sinners. And restoration comes only from the Lord Jesus Christ, not from Marx, Freud, John Money, Al Kinsey, none of those guys.
Yeah, we have inherent worth because we bear the imago Dei.
Yeah.
That image of God has been marred by sin, but it doesn't mean that it's been erased. Mm-hmm. And so there is people are inherently worthwhile. This is the only reason why you can say all people are created equal. Mm-hmm. The whole basis of or the assumption, I guess I would say, of DEI is the fact that all people have something that makes them equal with one another. And you only get that through the Judeo-Christian worldview. Yeah. There is no other philosophy that grounds that, because there's no other thing that you can point to that says this is the equal part. Yep. And so it's interesting how they will try to, again, crush Christianity, but what they're doing is they're undermining the very foundation of the equality they say they hope to achieve. Yep. And that's part of the problem of it. Yep. Okay, so in all of this, I don't know if Christian kids are feeling any better about going to school, but I will say that you can get through it. I think if you have a good understanding of what you're getting into, I think if you have a good support system somewhere, don't stop going to church, by the way. Many kids stop going to church in college.
I have a guide, I think it's on Frank Turek's blog, guide to students. And that's one huge thing I tell them. You've got to have a church community. And you got to be active in the church community. There's church on the Lord's Day, but there's also, Wednesday night or whatever it is. Be active in that. And then surround yourself with friends, Christian friends, who are going to encourage you in the Christian walk. And then the third thing, which is related to it, is just make sure that this is for you. Like, if you want to be a medical doctor, you got to go to university. If you were told you just need a 4-year degree to get a better job, that's probably not true anymore. And so just make sure you're not buying into a debt cycle myth, because then you're just subjecting yourself to 4 years of this when you don't need to. And then lastly, what I would say is, I wouldn't want the student to lose motivation by saying, "Hey, you can get through it." I know what you mean by that, but I would say you get to be victorious. You can have a great story to tell because you get to go into the spiritual battle, into the den where the lions are kept for Daniel. And the fiery furnace is there for his friends, and you get to have your witness. So be motivated by that. Look to the Lord and view this as an opportunity to let Christianity shine brightly.
That's great. Those are great words. Have you ever read one of the books that I recommend to a lot of kids? It's How to Stay Christian in College by Jay Budashevsky, which is a great small book, but it gives you a lot of these kinds of ideas as well. But you're absolutely right. These are so important. And again, because you'll find students who've been there, who've been 2 or 3 years older than you, and they can tell you that it's truly amazing. And there's certain clubs, there are Ratio Christi clubs on several campuses that you can engage with, or Crew, or depending on where you're at, you can find usually some of the Christian clubs there that will help move you and engage with you on your faith position as well. It's really, really important. So any closing?
I have a Ratio Christi booklet coming out in I think 3 or 4 weeks about Romans 1:18 through 21, titled Without Excuse. And so why not believing in God is rationally inexcusable. So it flips the narrative from you got to prove God exists to there's no excuse not to know God. So that should be out, part of the Ratio Christi booklet series, couple weeks.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and those are usually free electronically at the Ratio Christi site. So we'll put your website link in the description below, and we'll put the Ratio Christi link as well so that we can watch for when that comes out. That's going to be great. Any last words? I mean, I know that you've kind of done a pretty good summation right now, but any other things that we didn't cover in this topic that maybe we should have?
Yeah, I would say to the Christian students of any age, but especially young adults coming out of high school, don't forget that we're told by Jesus in John 17:3 that eternal life is knowing God and Christ Jesus whom he sent. And so that's our highest goal in life. And God made the world. It reveals who he is. Getting to study subjects from humanities to sciences is wonderful because you're studying the works of God. And so don't allow that to be robbed from you because it's been taken over by these false philosophies. That's just another way where you get to exercise the mind that God gave you for his glory.
All right. Well, Owen, thank you so much. We'll have to have you back when we
I always love
talk more
talking to
about
you.
some of these things. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, yeah. And stay cool out there.
It dropped a little bit. Last week was the hottest week of the summer, and my AC
Yep.
broke, of course.
Oh, of course.
Got it fixed,
Of course.
and we're back down to the 90s.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you so much, Owen, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.